So, hi, I just wanted to give a very, nuts and bolts talk about how to write an artist statement. Because the reason why I wanted to do this subject is that I was a poet for 15 years, just like writing through my 20s into my 30s. And I just started to think, wow, this actually could be something serious. Like this could actually be something professional. And when I started to look for grants and to go to residencies and to explain my work to other people, I just didn't have the tools to know how to do that on my own. And I would search online, how do you write an artist statement as a writer, not as a visual artist? And that information was not out there for me. So even now, I did a few Google searches and I asked some of my poet friends to ask them if they had artist statements. And a lot of them did not have that information, and online it's also very vague as well. So what I wanted to do is give some very concrete nuts and bolts. It feels very black and white, but it doesn't have to be as black and white as I've put it on the page. But I wanted to give you some information so that you would know if you wanted to write your own artist statement. So I think the first question I want to ask is, who has heard of an artist statement before for writers? What was your experience writing one?
It was ghetto. It was a mess. I think the thing that helped me or helped clarify things was somebody giving me a framework about what do you do, why do you do it, and why the thing that you're applying to now.
Yes.
But I felt like I didn't have a guideline, and so I'm like, what do you mean artist statements? So I felt like my initial artist statements were a lot of scrambling.
Yes.
Raggedy experience. 0 out of 10, don't recommend.
Well, let me tell you, that is exactly, thank you, Ajay, for embodying the way that I felt like when I was writing my artist statement. Because I feel that one of the most important things that you need in order to write an artist statement is a very clear framework as to how to frame your work and how to talk about your work in a very straightforward and non-abstract language. So I wanted to show you how the artist statement flows from my ideas of my own work and how I communicate that to other people and how I use that professionally to write for grants, write for awards, write for if a publisher or an editor asks for an artist statement, I have it right there for them to look at. So artist statements are really important because they help us to clarify what we do and why we do it and how it affects other people. And it also helps us to apply for professional grants and awards and other things that we want to do in order to progress in our own professional lives. What I think would be really helpful right now is I'm going to go ahead and read my first artist statement, the very short one on the first page. And the 3 questions: what do you write, why do you write it, and how does your work impact others? As you're reading my artist statement, think about how I'm answering those questions just on those 3 little paragraphs. Over the years, my poetry has focused on my experiences as an Asian American and mental health advocate. Currently, I'm working on long-form poetry. I admire Lee Young Lee's collection Rose, which contains the beautiful and meditative 9-page poem Always a Rose. Inspired by Lee, I've written a chapbook-length poem, The Woman, the River. The Woman, the River explores my childhood, including sexual trauma and my relationship with my mother and grandmother. The poems highlight concepts of strength and forgiveness against the backdrop of different rivers from Ohio, Hong Kong, Japan, and Japanese mythology. The poem navigates the question, how does a woman reclaim her body and relationships after trauma? By highlighting my multifaceted experiences and beliefs, I challenge the treatment of Asian American women as a monolith. I also encourage readers to honor their own experiences, their own stories of survival, strength, and resilience. So it's not something that doesn't have abstract language, it's straightforward, and I'm trying to answer the 3 questions behind me. I think that when we think about these questions, what do you write, why do you write, and how does your work impact others? these seem very big. Like, do they feel big in your mind when it feels like I have to get these down on paper and then I'm going to carve this structure, the sculpture, and I'm going to stick to this structure for the rest of my life. Right. That's not how an artist statement is. It's more like a snapshot of yourself at this time point. What motivates your work now? What is your work right now? So it's something that's going to kind of mold and change as you mold and change over time. So when you write one, you don't have to feel like you have to stick with this for the rest of your creative life. The first question that an artist statement answers is, what do you write? And this is sort of like talking about your focus to poetry, the types of poems you write, their form, and also their focus. So that question, what do you write, also seems a little bit broad. So what I have done is I've given you 4 guiding questions underneath that bigger question to kind of focus on your work and see how you can answer those questions based off of the 3 to 4 poems that you have already written down. The first question is, what are some recurring themes? So for me, in my artist statement, I say that my recurring themes are like family, trauma, and like personal growth. And then the second question is, what questions are your poems trying to answer or explore? So maybe they're not answering them, but they're exploring them. And if you look at my writer's statement, my artist statement, the question that I'm trying to answer is, how does a woman rebuild after trauma? And how does a woman rebuild her relationships and herself? And the third question is, what are you experimenting with in these pieces? So for me, I was going from short form poetry to long form poems after I read Lee Young Lee's Rose. And then the last question is, how are these pieces a step forward in the work that you've created in the past? So as poets, we're always going from like one level of like focus to another level of focus, either if it's like through form or structure or just like thematic differences in our work, because just like as we change, our work changes. So we want to be able to show the audience or who we're explaining our work to how we are going from one place to the next. Now that we've answered the question, what do you write? We have to move on to the second question, is why do you write? And this is the question that shows the motivation for your work, as Ajane was saying, like what motivates your work, what drives your work. And when we're thinking about that, you just go ahead, focus on those 3 to 4 poems, and you can ask yourself 3 different questions. The first question is, what made you write these poems? And if that's a big question, that can be very, very heavy. But as you can see in my writer's statement, I've only like given like 1 or 2 sentences to that. It doesn't have to be like a 3 to 4 page description, just a couple sentences. So in my artist statement, I'm talking about personal experience, and I'm talking about the lives of myself and my family. And then the second question you can ask is, what poems or books were you reading at the time when you wrote these poems? And for me, the thing that changed the way that I was approaching poetry was reading Lee Young Lee's Rose, and that poem that he wrote, the long poem in that section, that was called Always a Rose. And reading that poem changed the way that I approach poetry, like in general. I stopped going from short form and then these long flowing poems that became a chapbook. The other question you can ask yourself is, what poets or writers inspire you now? And you can think about, what are you reading now, and how does that affect your writing as a poet? So we've gone through those 2 questions, what do you write and why do you write? And then this question always feels so big. The last question is, how does your work impact others? And it's like, oh my goodness, I'm changing the world with my work. And that is true in many ways. And I think that understanding this question for yourself is really important, because I don't know about you all, but sometimes I become discouraged and I become like, I have like these writer blocks or these creative dry spells where I just feel like I can't go on. But when you understand this question and you understand how your work impacts others and how it changes them, how it transforms them, how it pushes them towards action, because that's what art does. And as artists, that is part of our our duty, our journey with the people that we affect with our work. So once you understand that, you're able to return to this part of the artist statement and kind of refresh yourself and say, yes, this is why I write. This is part of the reason why I write. So it feels like a big question. So what I did is I put down 4 different questions underneath it. The first question is, how should people connect to your work? And that feels like a big question. But if you look back at my artist statement, I've only done like 1 or 2 sentences here where I say that I'm trying to help people to connect their stories with my stories in a way that we're communally sharing our experiences within my work and then having them see their own experiences in my work as well. And then the second question is, what thoughts or structures does your work support? What does it push against? So for me, in my work, I'm pushing against the idea that Asian American women are this sort of like cookie cutter version, but that we are actually like very unique, we're diverse, we have different viewpoints, we have different beliefs. So my work is adding to that rich knowledge, that rich history of Asian American women. And then the other question is, what gaps does your work fill? So maybe there's a part of the stories or the narratives out there in poetry that your work actually helps to complement or actually like helps to fill the gaps for where people have less understanding of your communities, your culture, yourself. That's also a really important question. And the last question is, what steps would you like people to take after reading your work? So as artists, people read our work, they reflect on it, and then we're also challenging them to make a step either through changing their thoughts, moving them towards action. There's a real power behind what we write. So that's why we have such a great responsibility as artists. The artist statement is not just to end unto itself. You're not just going to have your artist statement and just let it sit there. Your artist statement actually can be used for grants. It can be used to clarify for yourself how you write and why you write, especially in times when you feel discouraged. It's great to go back to, and I've done this before, gone back to my artist statement. Or if you're in the midst of a project and you're like, I don't understand where this project is going, go back to your artist statement and just see, well, these are my priorities. These are my goals as an artist. How can I help the project return to the statement? You are your best advocate as a writer. And if you're able to verbalize, and express who you are as a writer, how much more powerful is that? What I would challenge you to do is write your artist statement, cull it down, and the fun activity to do, well, if it's fun, I guess it's fun, is give it to someone who isn't an artist or isn't a poet, and ask them to explain to you these 3 questions. And if they understand from your artist statement what those 3 questions are, then you have done an excellent job. Because this artist statement is not only for, for other artists, it's for people that are editors or publishers, or even people that are giving grants. They may not be a poet, but if you're able to explain your work to them in this straightforward manner, then you've done your work.